So what I'd like to do is I'd like to make a distinction between a reference and an object. So first and foremost, let me go to my Paint document here, which will sort of help illustrate this fact. But we have a class on the left-hand side, which is called fruit, which is of course a generalization of instantiations of the fruit class, which could potentially be made. Within the fruit class, we have a constructor, and this is, of course, a very simplistic example here. I would, of course, have instance variables sort of on the top before the constructor, but just to sort of demonstrate really what a reference is and what an object is, I'll keep this simple. But essentially, the constructor has three variables inside it. And essentially, this template, this class that we've created, is but the foundation for objects that we could create in the future. Now, what exactly are objects? So objects are essentially, we know that they're a collection of instance variables and methods which are condensed within the class. So in that case, um, so this is the constructor, but again, we have this idea of an object here, and an object is again the collection of instance variables and methods. And so in this case, we only have instance variables, which is completely fine. And so we have a name, which is a string. I'm not going to write that because the box isn't too big, but we have a name, we have a color, and let's see, we also have a shape. And so at this point, it becomes apparent that an object is in fact not sort of these are not objects, right? These are sort of references, right? So when I create fruit mango, when I refer to the class fruit and I make mango as the name which follows the class name, essentially what I'm doing is I'm creating a reference. And so mango is essentially this reference that I've created here. It's called mango. And it's referring to the object, which is essentially the collection of instance variables or methods, or in this case, only instance variables, right? And so it's the same thing with Apple. I mean, Apple is essentially just a reference to the collection of instance variables or methods which are available to it, which we've outlined in the constructor. And so in this case here, with Apple, very identical to Mango, Apple is just referring to this collection, which is, of course, let me actually just copy that because I don't actually need to draw another box, but it just refers to the same collection that Mango is referring to. And so at this point, I mean, both these objects are sort of identical. I mean, because they're not really initialized yet. But when I set mango, when I set the reference mango, I can say mango. So this reference, so now it's the compiler is sort of paying attention here instead of here. So when it says mango dot name, it's referring to this name. It's not referring to mango dot name here. It's referring to the mango dot name that we have here. So when I set mango dot name equal to mango, essentially what that does is mango it sort of gets the attention of the compiler and it says, okay, we're referring to this name here, and it sets this name equal to mango. Okay, and then when it does that, essentially you can actually just print out mango.name and you'd actually get what you've initialized the value to. And you could do that with each and every instance variable that you have here. And so the same thing applies with Apple, right? It refers to the same set of instance variables, but then when you can initialize it, those instance variables become unique and sort of exclusive to the reference which is referring to the object. And so this entire thing here, this entire thing can be thought of as the object, right? And this is essentially the reference. These are the references. And so in the main method, we're actually creating these references which refer to the object, which is nothing but the collection of instance variables or methods which are available to the potential reference. And so that's really the creation of the object itself. So in sort of to sort of demonstrate this a little better here, to sort of demonstrate this fact, if I were to go back into the main method, And let's see, if I were to say mango, the reference mango now equals the reference apple. And so mango no longer sort of refers to what mango was referring to. It refers to what apple was referring to. And since apple is referring to this collection, if this was initialized to apple by saying, if I were to have apple.name equals apple, essentially what that would do is it would sort of initialize this particular instance variable which apple is pointing to. And so now if I were to say mango equals apple, mango no longer is pointing to this instance variable or collection of variables. It's now pointing to the collection of variables which apple is pointing to. And so if I were to say mango dot name, if I were to just print that out, if I were to put that in a system.out.println statement, I would get apple as my name, because mango is now referring to what apple is referring to. And since apple is referring to this particular collection here, it would sort of set mango equal to apple in terms of the initialized variable, which is the name. And so in order to sort of demonstrate that in a more practical sense, let me go ahead and sort of do this on Eclipse. So I have a class here. And when I go back into my main method here and I make a reference equals new fruit called mango, and I make another reference called apple. Essentially what I'm doing now is I'm making these two references, and mango.name can sort of equal mango, right? And apple.name can equal apple. Now, when I set mango equal to apple, essentially what's happening is mango is now referring to the set of collection, to the set of instance variables or methods which apple is referring to. And since apple is referring to this particular instance variable, which is name, since it's initialized to apple, mango will now be initialized to apple in terms of the name. So printing out mango.name is essentially going to get me apple. Okay. And so if we were to, just for a demonstration purpose here, if we were to set mango equal to null, that would essentially say the reference is now pointing to nothing. And so if I were to go back here into my paint document, that would essentially mean that not only is mango not pointing to apple anymore, but it's actually not pointing to this set of instance variables either. And so how that would sort of manifest in our program is if we were to try to now print out mango.name, I would actually get nothing. I would get an error because there is nothing that mango is pointing to. And that nothing includes the instance variable called name. It's not even pointing to that either. And so if I were to sort of just only print this out, I'd probably get an exception here because it's not pointing to anything. And so that really demonstrates the difference between these references which point to a collection of variables or methods. And if they're null, that means they're not pointing to anything. And if they're pointing to one another, then that just means that they're pointing to what the other one is pointing to. If one reference is pointing to another reference, it's essentially just pointing to what that reference is pointing to, which sort of includes the initialization of the variables which are a part of the collection of the object.